Hello, everyone, and welcome to Asian Pacific Voices Radio, where you'll find stimulating conversations that explore diverse topics and stories that impact our Asian American communities. I'm your host, Rasha Goal, and today we are so honored to welcome a world-renowned soprano whose breathtaking voice has graced some of the most prestigious opera houses and concert stages across the globe. From her stunning performances in La Traviata, La Bohème, Romeo and Juliet, and Don Giovanni to her award-winning solo recordings, Nicole's artistry continues to captivate audiences. And beyond the stage, she is also a dedicated educator shaping the next generation of musicians at the Eastman School of Music. We are so excited to dive into her journey, her experiences in the opera world, and the passion that drives her career. It's my pleasure to welcome the lovely Nicole Cabell on Asian Pacific Voices Radio. Thank you, Nicole, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today.
Thank you so very much for having me. It's my honor to talk to you today.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. Well, you have such a diverse and rich background. So I want to talk about the rich cultural background, first of all. African-American, Korean, and a Caucasian heritage. How has that shaped your upbringing, your values, and your perspective as an artist in a traditional Eurocentric art form?
Yes, my background has almost it's almost prepared me for this career because so much of what I sing encompasses actually quite a bit of cultural diversity. While classical music is considered, of course, sort of a Western art form, you do explore lots of different languages and lots of different types of music within that diaspora. And growing up with a varied background, to put it lightly, sort of prepared me to sort of dive outside, think outside the box, kind of get outside my comfort zone in that respect. So, I have my grandmother on my mother's side was Korean. And so my entire family on that end, and a lot of the family I have based in Northern California, is Korean. And the African American side is in Southern California. And my white side, of which we tried to sort of do a sort of a DNA test, like kind of 23andMe thing, but we didn't sort of find a lot of answers. So I don't really know where in Europe that side came from, really. I have to be honest. But that's the side, of course, I sing. Most of the music I sing is from that side. But yeah, I think, it's one of those things growing up. My mother always told me, embrace everything that you are. Don't be pressured by people telling that you had to pick something, that you had to pick one thing. And so she'd always make me cross off other on those forms where you had to fill in your race. Just cross off other and put everything you are. So I really learned from a very young age to embrace the entirety of who I am. Even though, of course, sometimes that's not a popular concept. So I've been doing that for a long time, and my family was interracially mixing for a long time in the 40s. Both of my parents were married my grandparents were married interracially. So that's a whole interesting history that came down through the line and influenced me.
Wow. I mean, all the way back into the 40s. That's pretty interesting and interesting dynamics, I would say, because you don't always necessarily hear that or hear about it. And I loved how you crossed out. I loved how your mom inspired you to do that, to cross out other and just write in your ethnicity on your own, right? That's already empowering you at such a young age. Wow. I love that. I listened and I watched a couple of your videos, and your voice is just so tantalizing. It is so angelic, and it really resonates in your heart. And I was so fascinated to learn that by the age of 15, you were already singing. And I do want to mention to our listeners that then you went on to win the BBC Cardiff Singer of the World competition. So could you reflect back a little bit to those early years? And when did you know that opera was your calling? Like, this is what you wanted to do? And how did that major win actually shape the path that you're on right now?
Right. So because I'm an educator, I'm always discussing the concept of what is your sort of native connection to your to the music that you're singing now, and what are you bringing up from your childhood and your background to influence what you're singing now. And I was a good example of this because I grew up listening in my household to music that was not classical. The closest we ever came was musical theater we'd have on in the background. My mother loved musical theater, so there was always Sondheim and Andrew Lloyd Webber playing, and so I had that influence, but mainly it was rock, pop, this sort of thing. And when I was 15, I remember I was sort of playing around and imitating opera singers. So it was just kind of, messing around. And my mother heard me and said, you actually kind of sound like an opera singer, I think. So try out for the choir. And I did I think it was 2 days later, they had a audition in my school for the choir. And I remember I never sang before in front of anybody. And I just thought, well, let's see what's happening here. And I remember actually pushing my voice out in rehearsal. I was kind of singing really soft, and then I just pushed it out, just sent the air forward and pushed out the voice, and everybody kind of went, ooh, that's different.
Wow.
This is interesting. Well, maybe you should study classical music. And so it was a very weird path as a teenager to finding classical music. It was an accident, actually. And I spent, I'd say, the first several years of my studies acquainting myself with classical vocal music. I had no idea any of that repertoire. So I really learned, as my voice was developing, I learned the repertoire, and I dove into that world, just kind of, it was jumping into the deep end of the pool. So within a couple of years, I had studied enough that it was just, I had enough talent that I thought, well, this is kind of a weird and interesting career path. Why don't I see if I can major in this in school? So that's what I did. I auditioned for school, and I got into several, including the Eastman School of Music, where I proceeded to get my bachelor's. And really, I think it was the year of my graduation that I got accepted into a young artist program with the Chicago Lyric Opera.
Wow.
And so that was like a 3-year apprentice course, sort of like a, sort of a residency that a medical people would have in their field. We have this sort of thing with the Opera House where you're learning roles and taking coachings, but you're paid for it. So it's highly competitive. And I just thought, pinch me. I don't know what's happening. This is crazy. How did I get so lucky? And really within 3 years of that, I auditioned for this competition, the Cardiff Singer of the World competition, and I proceeded to win that competition, and that really launched my career. Nationally televised, internationally televised, but certainly televised in the United Kingdom. So everybody knows the winner, and that was sort of an audition that went out to opera houses across the world in Europe, and I've just been booked ever since. So I'd have to say that's probably one of the most important competitions, if not the most important competition for singing in the world. I'm extremely fortunate to have won that, and I credit that for the late stages of my educational development that really launched my career.
Well, that is quite a journey. That's that's not the typical path many take. What was coming to my mind was, when you were younger, how did you know to emulate those opera singers? So had you heard some of the operas? I know you said you had Andrew Lloyd Webber playing in the back, but you were listening to these other musical styles. So how did you know what opera sounded like?
That's a really good question. I actually never got that question. And I think, everybody knows what opera sounds like from Bugs Bunny and from commercials. And, I think it's just one of those, if you ask anybody on the street to say, imitate an opera singer, they can probably do it.
Yeah.
And so I literally had no idea what I was singing. I wasn't actually singing any real music. So I was, just making sounds. And I tried to sing. Pop music and jazz. And what came out was just, it did not sound right. It sounded like a parody, you know, an operatic parody.
Oh.
And that's why people said, "You have an opera voice. Just go with it. Just go with it."
Well, it's incredible. And speaking of the vocal part of it, your vocal identity is described as, I'd say, warm, expressive, and versatile. So how would you personally define it for yourself, and how has that evolved throughout the years for you?
Right. So whenever anybody is trying to develop a singing voice, they're told pretty early on what their characteristics are. What is the characteristic sound of your singing voice? And sometimes it's bright and silvery, sometimes it's boomy and loud, and sometimes it's warm and rich. I think for my voice, I fit into that category of warm and rich, but not very loud. So it's a sort of soft but warm voice, perfect for Mozart, um, Handel, French music, and I've always loved the bigger stuff, but you have to know your limitations. So I stick to the more lyric pieces. And yeah, I think we all hate the way we sound when we listen back to ourselves. So if you asked me what I sounded like, I'd say, oh, I sound like Kermit the Frog. But
I don't
I
think
ask
so,
other
but
people,
okay.
just when I listen back, I suppose we all are like that. But I listen back and I don't hear what other people hear. Some people have told me I have a beautiful sound to my voice. And so I say thank you. And then I can tell other people I have been told that. But I know my voice is warm. It's dark. It's on the darker side in terms of color. And
Mm.
again, that makes me ideal for roles that are melodic and um, your mature role, something like the Contessa, the Countess in the Marriage of Figaro, something like this, or sophisticated. Um, but you just got to go with the characteristics of your voice. So I'm trying to convince my students of this.
Well, it's an important thing to know, right? Especially for students who are building a career. I love how you said you have to know your range, especially if you're going to be doing something like this professionally, right? So you know where you're going to excel at. You have quite the repertoire and experience. Is there a role that has been especially challenging for you, or whether it was vocally or emotionally challenging?
Yes, the role that immediately comes to mind when you ask me about a challenging role. I'm talking vocally challenging, spiritually challenging. Uh, the acting is a challenge. It's Violetta in La Traviata, which is like the epitome of the tragic heroine Verdi role, and it is so hard. It's really difficult saying, you have this coloratura, high flying fioratura in the first part, and at the end you have to blood and guts, and then you die. So you have to bring so much depth to her throughout the evening. You only have 2.5 hours or so to just create this incredibly rich three-dimensional character and somehow get through it vocally. So yeah, she's the real challenge for me.
I love how you incorporated the spiritual part of it too, because there sounds like there's so much heaviness also to the character, which you have to emote through your voice as well, I can imagine.
You have to create a color that tells the world you are in pain and that you're crying and these things, but you can't do that, or else you're not going to be able to sing the notes. So you have to play with all this color to give the audience a sense of empathetic understanding of the emotion you're trying to portray. It's not just singing the notes. And so and also, of course, when you're up there, you're thinking, you kind of get lost in the character. And if you're not careful, you'll get overwhelmed by what's going on, losing her lover and contemplating her death at such a young age. This is really, yeah, it's very heavy stuff. And it's just a talent. It's a challenge to keep your head on your shoulders and to make sure you are in the light. You're looking at the conductor. You
Yes.
remember your words, all these things at the same time, trying to convince the audience you're not trying, that you just are this character. But that's why you study for a long time.
I just find that so powerful as an artist, because you really have to be fully in tune to everything around you. And I think especially when you're doing a live performance, right? There's this whole different element and this whole different adrenaline running, but then to also be in tune to all those factors is truly, truly a gift. So thank you for sharing that, because it's not something I had necessarily thought about. I do want to bring up something that goes back to 2022 when you played Juliet in Romeo et Juliet, which was along a very extraordinary API cast, including Panay Patti and Simon Lim, and it was directed by Matthew Ozawa. What was it like to bring this iconic story to life with such representation, both on and off stage? It's a very, it's not a common opportunity we get, so it must have been very exciting.
Yeah, I loved that experience. And I had worked with Matthew before on the same production. So when I was brought in, they still had my costumes, and I had done this in Cincinnati before with him. But it was such a pleasure to join him again with Penne, who is incredible. You know, he's probably one of the nicest, certainly the most talented, but one of the nicest, most collegial people I've ever worked with. Incredible sound. And we were commenting on that. We just, this is so great, you know, that we sort of feel like we're with people of similar backgrounds. I felt like he was a Romeo that we kind of looked good on stage together because we have similar kind of complexions, and our voices both kind of have this little extra maybe creamy color. And it was also nice to do it in San Diego, which is, you know, a city, the whole of California. You know, you get a little bit more Pacific representation in California. So it was also kind of great that Opera House was representing at that time such a multicultural cast. You know, it was wonderful.
How fun. I wish I had seen that one. Opera. It's such a tradition. It's such a beautiful, beautiful art form. I know that it's evolving, and I'd love to get your perspective on how it's evolving, and also, and as how you see your role as a biracial, globally performing soprano. How are you helping to shape the future of opera to be more inclusive and resonant for new audiences?
Opera is definitely changing. I would say within the last decade or so, opera companies and intendants have been more conscious and put in more effort to bring people of multicultural backgrounds into the opera houses, which just wasn't really as available to us for the longest time. Most people would say that that's true. So that has been a slow work in progress. You are definitely seeing more representation on the stage, which I love. A couple years ago, because this is sort of post-COVID and the George Floyd events and everything that followed suit, you also have a move toward more representation of African American and Black singers on stage, and that hit a peak a couple years ago, and you know, now it's sort of petering out, and that distresses me a little bit, and I hope that opera houses will continue to stand by what they stood by a couple of years ago. But it doesn't seem to be, it seems to have changed. And some of those changes, I think, are here to stay. So I'm positive in that respect. I think my job at this point is to continue to represent myself, just sing on stages and make sure my presence, like everybody else of multicultural backgrounds, can just continue to sing and be in the spotlight, but also to take on projects that are more diverse projects. So, for instance, I sang an opera called L'Amant Anonyme by Joseph Bologne. He was, of course, called, I don't know this name, but he has been recently called the Black Mozart. So he was an 18th century Black composer in France, and his music sort of got dug up, if you will, a couple of years ago. And so his works are being performed now a lot more often. And we just performed, me and some colleagues of mine, an opera by Edmond Dédé, who was a Black composer in America who moved to France and composed an opera called Morgiane. And we gave the first full performance of this opera ever in the history of his composition and this type of project just a couple of months ago. So I try to take on these projects that highlight non-canon repertoire from diverse composers. And as an educator, I try to bring that repertoire into my studio and continue to encourage young singers with backgrounds that can relate to mine. I encourage them to continue to believe in themselves and put themselves out there and not just take on new and unusual projects like this, but continue to introduce themselves into canon repertoire with opera companies, so that just being on stage is representation enough, I think. But yeah, that's sort of where we are now, and I just hope it continues to evolve, and that it doesn't devolve given the trends at the current moment, and we don't devolve away from continued representation.
It's been so fascinating. Well, it makes me think about too opera, right? And this art form. Where do you think we're headed with it?
I think this question of where is classical music going has been on the table. People have been saying, people have been talking about this since the 70s and 80s, and back in the 50s and 60s, where there was this sort of big push for classical music and culture in America, and you had the Met broadcasts, and you had the talk shows, all these incredible opera singers and classical musicians on just your average late night television talk show. These days are not as common anymore, but people have been talking about this for a long time, and there's always this fear that we're going to lose our audience. And typically what you see is the evolution of the art form to try to match the zeitgeist a little bit more. And so that is what's happening. I can speak for opera, that is what's happening. It is a very good question as to, with sort of the financial instability of our population right now, whether or not people are going to shell out the money to go to live performance. We've never lived in a time like this where we can get the variety of entertainment that we can get on our televisions and our phones and computers. And so every venue, even movie theaters, are suffering so much right now. So I think we are definitely seeing a decline in audience attendance, but I don't necessarily know if that's a decline in interest for classical music. I think it's just live performance in general. We suffer a little bit, and we have to continue to find ways to make tickets accessible to people, to make these performances and productions that we're putting on a little more digestible for audiences. And it doesn't mean dumbing it down. It means, maybe adding more music that is more modern, music that has sounds and melodic structure that people can relate to a little bit more, especially in America. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we're a dying art form. I just think that we have to constantly innovate and be vigilant, and we can't get complacent and just think we're always going to get an audience. You have to keep trying. You have to keep going into communities for outreach. You have to keep trying to get it on television. You have to keep up the onslaught of sort of social media videos and Instagram, and you got to evolve in that way. But that's how I see it today, and I hope that I'm right in 25 years, 50 years, that it continues to be relevant.
People often see the glamorous side, especially in performing arts. But I'm sure there's so much that happens behind the scenes, behind the curtains. So what's one thing that you could share with us that happens in the daily life of an opera singer that we might be surprised to learn about?
I think the thing that shocks people more than anything else that know me, it's the boring stuff, right? So it's when I'm on an opera engagement or a symphonic, anytime I have to sing in front of people, I go on vocal rest. So that means I am a mute. I do not talk. It's like a day before the opera. I will completely just shut up. I will try not to go shopping because I have to sometimes talk to cashiers. I will just, and if my husband's with me, it's so funny, but literally we'll sit next to each other and text each other. This is the reality. You have to protect this instrument because, I'm 47. I'm going to be 48 years old this year, and I've been singing for a long time. And that's because I do that, right? I know so many people who just live normal lives. You cannot overtalk. You have to sleep. You can't eat certain foods too late at night. God forbid you should have acid reflux. You just really have to take care of yourself and be a nun with your life when you're singing. So I really try to have fun when I'm not singing. I'm like, okay, let's try a new tiki drink recipe. Let's sing pop music at the top of our lungs. Okay, a couple of weeks out from a show, back to being, really disciplined.
Nicole, looking back at your journey from when you first began to the international stages, what advice would you have for aspiring singers, especially those that come from underrepresented communities and backgrounds who dream for a career in opera?
The advice I would give to anybody, young singers and certainly singers from diverse backgrounds who are looking to study opera and possibly pursue a career in opera would probably be something along the lines of just have a lot more fun. Have a lot more fun than I did. I was so worried all the time about other people and where I stacked up with other people. And the thing is, if you're from a diverse background or you have like an unusual look, you're not going to be like other people anyway. So you might as well embrace your difference and just have incredible confidence in yourself. And just that alone will sell your talent. Also, keep going. Don't take it all so seriously. Just keep going, put on the blinders. And it's a war of attrition, right? You gotta just, you can't give up and you can't get discouraged because people will want to discourage you at every step of the road. But just believe in yourself, right? Believe in yourself and have confidence in your wonderful uniqueness.
Well, Nicole, before we let you go here, I have a fun little rapid fire question for you. So just whatever comes to mind. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What's the one opera role you could perform every night and never get tired of?
Mimi La Bohème.
If you could duet with any musician, living or past, who would it be?
Stevie Nicks or Sting. Hard.
All right, your favorite pre-show or superstition?
Pre-show ritual or superstition. Listen to your favorite dance music in the dressing room. Yeah.
Ooh. And what's your go-to comfort food after a big performance?
Ooh, something like pizza, burritos, or nachos. I'll stick with like nachos. Not good for you.
And if you weren't an opera singer, what career would you have pursued?
I would have been a writer, a fiction writer, horror novels.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And describe your voice in 2 words.
Sympathetic, smooth.
Nicole, this has been so much fun just chatting with you. You've been such a wealth of knowledge, and I really enjoyed learning about your career path and your journey and just all the different opportunities that you've had and that you continue to create. Now, where can our viewers, our listeners find you? What social media?
Oh, yeah, likewise. I really enjoyed this talking to you. I'm old. I'm on Facebook, but I also am just starting to do Instagram. You won't find me on TikTok. I'm sorry.
You are not old. Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to thank you once again, Nicole Cabell, for joining us on Asian Pacific Voices Radio. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and learning more about your journey. And for all of you that are watching or listening, don't forget, you can send us your comments, any questions you'd like to share, or any suggestions you may have. We'd also love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to our program on your favorite podcast platform or to subscribe to our show on your favorite platforms again, such as Facebook, X, Instagram, and of course, our YouTube channel. Asian Pacific Voices Radio is produced by Asian Culture and Media Alliance, a nonprofit that empowers the Asian Pacific American communities with a voice through media arts. So if you'd like to learn more about our program or support Asian Culture and Media Alliance, please do visit us at acmasocal.org. Thank you once again for joining us on Asian Pacific Voices Radio. I'm your host, Rasha Goel. Continue to share your stories and comments with us, and we look forward to sharing more inspiring stories with all of you. Until next time.